When my daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "You need to leave this house by tomorrow," I collapsed into the kitchen chair, unable to breathe. 3 days later, I was sleeping in a cheap motel while she changed the locks on my home of 30 years. That's when I realized life doesn't just throw curveballs. Sometimes it launches the entire pitching machine at your head. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're from. Because trust me, this story twists harder than a tornado in a corkscrew factory. My name is Anna, and 6 months ago, I had everything a 58-year-old woman could want: a beautiful home, a successful husband, and what I thought was a loving daughter. Then Paul, my husband of 35 years, dropped dead from a heart attack during his morning jog, and my world began unraveling faster than I could grab the threads. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and pitying glances. Clara, our 32-year-old daughter, stood beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. I mistook that grip for solidarity. How naive I was. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," Clara said 2 weeks after we buried Paul. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, Thanksgivings, and Clara's college acceptance letter. "What about it?" I asked, still lost in grief's fog. "Dad left some financial issues behind." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "The business wasn't doing well. There are creditors, loans." "I shook my head. "That's impossible. Paul always handled everything perfectly. He would have told me." Clara's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "He didn't tell you everything, Mom. Trust me." That should have been my first warning, but grief has a way of dulling your instincts. I believed her when she said she was handling things. I signed papers she put in front of me, trusting my only child. Then came that terrible Tuesday. I returned from my weekly grief support group to find Clara sitting at the kitchen table with a young man in an expensive suit. "This is Marcus," she said. "He's helping me sort out Dad's estate." Marcus barely looked at me as he slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Pearson, this transfers ownership of the property to Clara, as per your late husband's wishes." "What are you talking about?" My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. Script part separator, equals. "There's been a change in the estate plan," Marcus explained, his tone clinical. "Clara is now the sole owner of this property." I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to laugh, to say this was some terrible misunderstanding. Instead, she stared at the granite countertop, her fingers tracing the swirls of black and gray. "Paul would never do this. I've lived here for 30 years. I built this home with him." "Dad changed his will last year," Clara finally said. "He wanted to protect the family assets." "Protect them from what? From who?" I felt like I was drowning in my own kitchen. "From me, his wife." Marcus cleared his throat. "There's a timeline for vacating the premises. We're prepared to be generous. 2 weeks should be sufficient." 2 weeks. I laughed, a sound so brittle it could have shattered the windows. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." "Mom," Clara's voice hardened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I spent that night in our bedroom, my bedroom, surrounded by photos of our family, of Paul and me in happier times. How could he have done this? I ransacked his office, searching for answers, for some clue that would explain why my husband would betray me this way. The next morning, Clara was waiting for me in the kitchen. "I need you out by the end of the week," she said without preamble. "I've found you a nice apartment downtown." "I'm not leaving," I repeated. There must be some mistake. "No mistake, Mom." She finally looked me in the eyes, and I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. "You need to leave this house by tomorrow, or I'll have you removed." That's when I collapsed, when the world went sideways and nothing made sense anymore. Script part separator, equals. I checked into the Sunrise Motel that night, a place I'd driven past for decades without a second glance. Now it was home, room 118, with its cigarette-burned carpet and a mattress that remembered every guest who'd slept on it. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends who'd heard what happened. I couldn't bear to answer them. How do you explain that your only child has thrown you out like yesterday's garbage? On my 3rd day of exile, I finally called Diane, my oldest friend and the only attorney I knew personally. "She can't do this," Diane said after I'd poured out the whole ugly story. "Something's not right here." "Paul changed his will," I said, my voice hollow. Clara showed me papers. Did you actually see the will? The real will, not just whatever summary she waved around? I hadn't. In my shock and grief, I'd simply accepted what I was told. Meet me at my office tomorrow, Diane said. And Anna, bring every financial document you can find. The next morning, I dug through the banker's box of papers I'd grabbed on my way out. Bank statements, insurance policies, our marriage certificate, fragments of a life built over decades, now reduced to evidence. Diane's office was warm and reassuring, nothing like the sterile conference room where Marcus had ambushed me. She reviewed my documents, her frown deepening. Paul's company was worth millions, she said. Where's all that money now? Clara said there were financial problems, creditors. Let's find out. I'm filing for probate tomorrow. As his widow, you have rights, Anna. For the first time since Paul's death, I felt a flicker of hope. That flicker dimmed considerably when we received notice of the first probate hearing. I walked into the courthouse clutching Diane's arm, terrified of facing Clara and her sleek lawyer. They were already seated when we entered, Clara in a conservative black dress that made her look older, harder. She didn't acknowledge me. The judge reviewed the filings, then asked Marcus to present the will. Your Honor, my client inherited everything through this properly executed document, he said smoothly, approaching the bench with a thick folder. Diane stood. We contest the validity of that will, Your Honor. Mrs. Pearson was never informed of these changes during her husband's lifetime. Marcus smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The deceased's wishes were clear. Perhaps Mrs. Pearson should have paid more attention to her husband's affairs. May I see the document? The judge asked. As she reviewed it, I watched Clara. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. When had my daughter become this cold stranger? Then Marcus laughed, actually laughed, leaning over to whisper something to Clara. She blanched visibly. Is something amusing, counselor? The judge asked sharply. Marcus composed himself. Forgive-me, Your Honor. It's just that. She didn't read the will. Script part separator, The judge's eyes narrowed. Explain yourself, counselor. Marcus cleared his throat, suddenly aware he'd stepped over a line. What I meant, Your Honor, is that the plaintiff clearly hasn't reviewed the actual document. If she had, Diane snatched the will from the clerk. Her eyes scanned the pages rapidly, then she looked at me with something between shock and triumph. Anna, she whispered, Paul didn't disinherit you. What? My voice echoed in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Your Honor, Diane addressed the court. This will specifically states that Mrs. Pearson retains lifetime rights to the family home, regardless of who inherits the property title. Furthermore, she's entitled to 50% of all business assets. Clara's face drained of color. She turned to Marcus, hissing something I couldn't hear. The judge studied the document. Ms. Pearson, he addressed Clara, were you aware of these provisions? Clara looked trapped. Marcus told me. Ms. Pearson was advised of the general inheritance structure. Marcus interrupted smoothly. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding about specific provisions. A misunderstanding? I found my voice, standing despite Diane's restraining hand. You threw me out of my own home based on a misunderstanding? Mrs. Pearson, please, the judge cautioned. No, eu want to know. Anger replaced shock, burning away the fog I'd been living in. Why would you do this, Clara? What could possibly make you treat me this way? Clara voulait meet my eyes. Dad said we needed to protect the assets. That you couldn't handle the business decisions. That you delose everything. Order, the judge called as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I expect some explanations. In the alve, Diane gripped my shoulders. This is good, Anna. Very good. But something's still not right. Why would Paul tell Clara you couldn't handle things? Issue my head, memories flickering through my mind. Paul always handled the finances. He said I wasn't good with money. Was he right? I stopped really thinking about it. I managed our household budget for 30 years without ever overdrawing our account. I put Clara through college without touching the emergency fund. He built my interior design business from nothing. Diane smiled grimly. So no, he wasn't right. Which means we need to find out what else he lied about. Script part separator equals. When we returned to the courtroom, everything changed. The judge ordered a full accounting of Paul's estate, and what we discovered left me breathless. Paul hadn't just kept secrets, he'd built an entire shadow life. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. A condo in Miami under a company name. And most shocking of all, a $2 million life insurance policy with Clara as the sole beneficiary, purchased just 6 months before his death. Why didn't you tell me about the insurance? I asked Clara outside the courthouse. She looked away, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her designer purse. Dad said not to. He said you'd try to take it all. Take it. Clara, when have he ever taken anything from you? You took his attention. His love. Her voice broke. Every time I achieved something, it was never enough for him. That's when I understood. Paul had been poisoning our daughter against me for years. The next hearing revealed even more. Paul's business partner, Richard, testified that Paul had been siphoning company funds for years. He was terrified of getting caught, Richard said. He kept saying he needed to protect the money for Clara, that his wife would get everything in a divorce. Divorce? I nearly shouted. He never wanted a divorce. Richard looked confused. He said you'd found out about Sarah and were planning to take him for everything. Sarah. The name hit me like a physical blow. Paul's young assistant. The one he worked late with so often. Clara's face showed the same shock I felt. She hadn't known about the affair either. That night, my daughter called me at the motel. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. He fought. Dad made it sound like you were trying to ruin him. That you were bitter and greedy. Her voice broke. He showed me bank statements, said you were hiding money for a divorce. Clara, he never. I know that now. Richard showed me everything today. Dad was stealing, Mom. He was setting it up to look like you were embezzling from his company. Script part separator equals. I sank onto the motel bed, dizzy with revelation. My husband of 35 years hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been systematically framing me, turning my daughter against me, preparing to discard me like outdated furniture. The next day, Clara and I met at a cafe halfway between my motel and what was supposedly my house again. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect makeup absent. I had a meeting with Marcus this morning, she said, stirring her untouched coffee. He knew, Mom. He knew everything. The lawyer? I wasn't surprised. Something about him had seemed off from the beginning. He was Dad's friend from college. She looked up, her face haunted. Marcus helped him set up those offshore accounts. He coached Dad on how to manipulate me against you. Why would he do that? Dad owed him money. A lot of money. Clara's hands trembled. Gambling debts. Marcus covered for him for years. In exchange, Dad promised him a percentage of the business after you were out of the picture. The picture grew clearer, more horrifying. I wasn't just facing a greedy daughter, I was facing a conspiracy. Paul, Marcus, and who knew who else, all working to rob me of everything I'd helped build. When did you find this out? I asked. Last night. I went through Dad's emails. Clara pulled out her phone, slid it across the table. Read them. The messages made me physically ill. Paul and Marcus, plotting for years. Discussing when to pull the trigger on their plan. Laughing about how easy I was to manipulate. And the most recent emails, sent just weeks before Paul's death, discussing how Clara was finally ready to play her part. My own daughter, grow to betray me. Script part separator equals. I pushed the phone back across the table, unable to read anymore. The cafe around us continued its cheerful bustle, oblivious to my world collapsing for the second time in a month. I never meant to hurt you, Clara whispered. Dad said it was just business, that you'd be taken care of. I trusted him. You threw me out of my home, I said, my voice flat. You watched me pack my things in garbage bags. She flinched. Marcus said we had to move quickly. That you might destroy financial records if you suspected anything. A waitress stopped by, her smile faltering as she sensed the tension. Everything okay here, ladies? No, nothing was okay. My husband had betrayed me, my daughter had been turned against me, and somewhere in Miami, a woman named Sarah probably had no idea the man she'd been sleeping with had died planning to scam his wife. After the waitress left, Clara reached for my hand. E pulled it away. Mom, please. I want to fix this. Can you? Can you wangindo Ayurveda? The anger I'd suppressed for weeks surged through me. Do you have any idea what it felt like? Sleeping in that disgusting motel, wondering where I went wrong as a mother? Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. I'll do anything. I've already fired Marcus. I've contacted the bank about the offshore accounts. And the house? My home. It's yours. It was always yours. I'm so sorry. Don't. I stood up, throwing money on the table for my untouched coffee. I need time, Clara. This isn't something you can fix with an apology. As I walked out, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Ana, it is Richard. We need to talk. Paus troubles go de perden you know. Meet me at the office tomorrow. Don't tell Clara. Script part separator equals. I arrived at Pearson & Associates the next morning, feeling like an intruder. I'd visited Paul's office hundreds of times over the years, bringing him lunch, attending company parties. Now security asked for ID, and the receptionist's eyes widened when I gave my name. Richard met me in the conference room, looking aghast. The strain of the past month showed in the new lines around his eyes. Thank you for coming, Anna. He gestured to the chair across from him. I know this must be difficult. Just tell me what is going on, Richard. What did you mean about Paul's troubles going deeper? He slid a folder across the table. These are loan documents. Paul borrowed nearly $2 million last year from Vincent Castellano. The name hit me like a bouquet of cold water. Vincent Castellano wasn't a banker or an investor. He was the kind of man whose name appeared in hushed conversations about businesses that mysteriously burned down after refusing to pay for protection. Why would Paul borrow from someone like that? My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Richard's face was grim. The gambling debts were worse than anyone knew. He'd already maxed out company credit, taken second mortgages on everything. Including our house? I asked, already knowing the answer. The house, the beach condo, even Clara's apartment. Richard met my eyes. Vincent's people have been calling. They want their money. But Paul is dead, I said stupidly. Richard nodded. They don't care. The debt transfers to his estate. Toyu and Clara. Script part separator $2 million. The number hung in the air between us, impossible and terrifying. They've given us 30 days, Richard continued. After that. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why not go to Clara? Richard looked uncomfortable. Clara's been involved with Marcus for over a year. I'm not sure who she'd tell. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My daughter and my husband's lawyer? Another betrayal, another secret. I need proof, I said. Of everything. Richard nodded, sliding a USB drive across the table. Paul kept records. Protecting himself, I guess. Everything's here, the loans, the gambling receipts, emails between Clara and Marcus dating back 18 months. I clutched the small drive, this tiny container of destruction. What do I do now? You have options, Richard said carefully. Vincent respects people who face him directly. If you approach him before the deadline. The next day, I sat in an upscale restaurant across from Vincent Castellano, a man whose reputation suggested I should be terrified. Instead, I felt eerily calm. Mrs. Pearson, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I was sorry to hear about Paul. Thank you for meeting me, I replied, sliding an envelope across the table. This is what I can offer today. He opened it, eyebrows raising at the property deed inside. The Miami condo, I explained. Worth about half what Paul owed you. I'm prepared to sign it over immediately. And the other half. Vincent asked. I need 90 days, I said. I have jewelry, art, and Paul's business share to liquidate. Vincent studied me for a long moment. Your husband lied to me repeatedly. Why should I trust you? I met his gaze steadily. Because unlike Paul, I understand what's at stake. And because I brought collateral. I placed my wedding ring on the table, a 4-carat diamond Paul had upgraded on our 30th anniversary. Vincent's mouth twitched in what might have been respect. 90 days, he agreed. But I keep this until then. He pocketed the ring. I had bought time, but now I needed leverage. The USB drive from Richard provided it. Script part separator ===. The next morning, I received another surprise visitor at my motel room. Sarah, Paul's assistant, his mistress, stood nervously at my door, clutching a leather portfolio. Mrs. Pearson, I'm so sorry to disturb you, she said, her voice higher than I'd expected. But there's something you need to see. I almost slammed the door in her face. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. She was younger than I'd imagined, barely 30, with anxious eyes that couldn't meet mine. I didn't know he was planning to leave you, she blurted out. He told me you two were already separated. What do you want, Sarah? I wasn't interested in her guilt or justifications. She opened the portfolio. Paul gave me these to store in my apartment safe. Said they were backup copies in case anything happened to him. Inside were documents I'd never seen, transfer agreements moving company ownership to shell corporations, backdated signatures, my signatures, forged with remarkable precision. He was setting you up, Sarah said quietly. If the business failed or the IRS investigated, everything would point to you. Why show me this now? Because he did the same thing to me. Her voice hardened. I found out I'm pregnant 3 weeks before he died. When I told him, he denied everything. Said he'd prove I was trying to scam him. I stared at this woman carrying my husband's child, and felt nothing but pity. There's more, she continued. Marcus has been threatening me since the funeral. Says I'll never see a penny unless I keep quiet about certain transactions. What transactions? She pulled out one final document, a life insurance policy for $5 million with Sarah listed as beneficiary. Marcus says it doesn't exist. That I forged it. Her hands trembled. But I didn't. I studied the woman who should have been my enemy and made a decision. We need to work together, I said. Script part separator ===. Sarah looked shocked at my suggestion. Work together? After what I did to you. I took a deep breath. Paul betrayed us both. Now his friends are trying to take everything. Over the next week, Sarah and I built an alliance neither of us could have imagined. She had access to Paul's private email. I had knowledge of the business operations. Together, we constructed a complete picture of Paul's elaborate scheme. Meanwhile, Clara kept calling. I let most go to voicemail, but finally agreed to meet her at a diner near the courthouse. Mom, she began immediately, I've been trying to reach you. Vincent Castellano's people came to my apartment. Isipid my coffee calmly. I know. I've handled it. Her eyes widened. How? I've made arrangements. De Miami quando buis US time. Clara's face crumpled. I've been so stupid. So blind. Dad manipulated me for years, and I let him. Yes, you did. I wouldn't give her the easy absolution she wanted. And you've been sleeping with Marcus for over a year. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. How did you? Richard told me. The USB drive has your emails. Mom, I can explain. Don't botir. Ikuti harofi. I'm meeting with the district attorney tomorrow. There's evidence of extensive fraud, including documents with forged signatures, my signatures. Clara Palid. Are you having me arrested? I should. The thought had crossed my mind in my darkest moments. But no. I'm offering you a choice. What choice? You can help me take down Marcus and recover what's left of our family's assets, or you can go down with him. Clara stared at me, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman I'd become in the crucible of betrayal. Tell me what to do, she whispered. Script part separator ===. I laid out my plan, watching Clara's expression shift from shock to grim determination. First, you need to get back into Marcus's good graces, I told her. Make him think you're still on his side. He's been calling me constantly, Clara admitted, saying we need to present a united front against you. Perfect. Tell him you've seen me, that I'm falling apart. That I'll take any settlement offer to avoid a court battle. 2 days later, Marcus took the bait. Clara forwarded his email suggesting a meeting at his office. Just the three of us, no other attorneys present. Are you sure this will work? Sarah asked as she helped me prepare. No, I admitted. But it's our best chance. I arrived at Marcus's sleek downtown office dressed in my most defeated-looking outfit, wrinkled slacks, minimal makeup, hair unstyled. I needed him to see me as broken. Marcus and Clara were waiting, his arm possessively around her shoulder. I noticed how she subtly stiffened at his touch. Anna, he greeted me with fake warmth. I'm glad we can discuss this civilly. I just want it over with, I mumbled, eyes downcast. He smiled, the predator sensing weakness. I think we can arrange something fair. Say, the household items, your personal belongings, and a small settlement. The house and business assets would remain with Clara, of course. I nodded meekly. Whatever you think is best. Excellent. Marcus couldn't contain his triumph. I'll draw up the papers immediately. There's just one thing, I said, fumbling in my purse. I found these documents. I don't understand them, but they have my signature, and I don't remember signing them. I slid the forged documents across his desk, watching his face carefully. Script part separator, ===. Marcus's expression flickered, just for a second, before his lawyer's mask slipped back into place. He glanced at the documents, then at Clara. These are standard business papers, he said smoothly. You signed them years ago. Memory can be unreliable during grief. I kept my face carefully blank, vulnerable. Maybe you're right. It's just, the dates seem recent. He smiled, patronizing. Paul often had you sign things in batches. For efficiency. And my signatures on these loan documents from Vincent Castellano? Were those for efficiency too? The color drained from Marcus's face. Clara, playing her part perfectly, looked between us with convincing confusion. What loan documents? She asked. Marcus knows, I said quietly, reaching into my purse again. This time I pulled out a small recording device. Just like he knows about the offshore accounts he helped Paul set up. And the insurance fraud. And how they planned to frame me for embezzlement if things went wrong. Marcus lunged for the recorder, but Clara blocked him. Is it true? She demanded. Did you and my father plan all this? Don't be ridiculous, he snapped. Your mother is desperate. She'll say anything. I have proof, I interrupted, my meek facade gone. Sarah provided quite a collection of documents. And Richard has been very cooperative with the district attorney. Marcus's eyes darted to the door. I smiled. If you're thinking of leaving, don't bother. There are 2 police detectives in your reception area. They're very interested in these forged documents, especially since the notary whose stamp appears on them died 3 years before the documents were created. You bitch, he hissed. No, I corrected him. Just a woman who's done being everyone's victim. When the detectives entered and read Marcus's rights, I felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness. The road ahead would be long. Lawsuits, criminal proceedings, the painstaking recovery of stolen assets. As Marcus was led away, Clara collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Not for him, I realized, but for everything we'd lost. 3 months later, we sat on the porch of our family home, my home again, legally and morally. The criminal cases against Marcus were proceeding, with additional charges being added as investigators uncovered more evidence. Paul's fraudulent activities had died with him, but he'd left behind a tangle that would take years to fully unravel. Mom, Clara said, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I don't expect you to ever fully forgive me. I studied my daughter's profile, seeing both the child I'd raised and the stranger she'd become. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Clara. It's something I give when I'm ready. And are you ready? I sighed. Getting there. Sarah had given birth to a baby boy the previous week. Paul's son would never know his father, which seemed a blessing now. I'd surprised myself by offering to be part of the child's life, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. Vincent Castellano had accepted our payment plan, returning my wedding ring as promised when we met our first deadline. I promptly sold it to help cover the debt. Some symbols weren't worth keeping. The district attorney called, Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence. They found evidence that Dad was being blackmailed before he started gambling. Someone knew about Sarah years ago. I nodded, unsurprised. There are always deeper layers. Does it ever stop hurting? She asked quietly.
No, y en suara tu nasli.
But you learn to build around the pain. To use it as a foundation rather than letting it bury you. As the last light faded from the sky, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, and might never be completely. But because I discovered my own strength in the rubble of betrayal. When my daughter threw me out of my home, she never imagined she was setting me free. Free from lies, from manipulation, from a marriage that had rotted from within while I maintained its gleaming facade. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most profound healing. And sometimes, the cruelest betrayal becomes your greatest liberation. Sometimes life's cruelest lessons bring the most freedom. I lost everything, but finally found myself.